Hello and welcome to another coding session with Mr. Jacob. This is part 2 of our tmux from scratch series where we are configuring tmux to be your perfect coding and work companion. In the last session, we actually created a basic tmux.conf file, which contains all of the quality of life configurations that we might need and want. For example, something like we set the prefix key to another one instead of Control B, we are using Control A. We made it so that we can actually use, by double tapping Control A, send the real Control A to, for example, use the incrementing feature in NeoVim. We took care of changing the base index to 1 to make every window switch and pane switch easier to reach on our keyboard. Took care of mouse support, history limits, and so on and so on. We furthermore explored the basic concepts of tmux, like sessions, like windows, like panes, what they are, how they behave, how you can create them, manage them, switch between them, and all of that stuff. So if you're interested in that, please take a look at the linked first session of this video. However, if you want to know how you can actually theme this green bar at the bottom of the screen down here and make it look nice and contain the contents that you actually want it to contain, then you are quite right in this video. So let's get right into it, how we can actually style or change the behavior of that bar. We do that, first of all, by simply using everything that we already have at our disposal, the same commands and option structures, as well as the .tmux.conf file that we already have been creating here in the last session. So essentially, the behavior and contents of this bar is set by specific options that we can set in tmux. And what is better than to take a look at the tmux main page to see all of these options. So the first thing that a lot of people want to do is to move the bar actually up to the top of the screen. That would be, so to speak, the first kind of visual changing configuration that we could do. And even though I am not one of those people, I like the bar at the bottom. Even though it actually coincides then with my Vim status bar here right beside to it, I actually like that kind of configuration and visual appeal because it always is in the same area of me looking there. That's usually where the command line in NeoVim is. That's usually where I have my shell prompt when I'm typing something, and so on and so on. However, if you want it at the top, that's no problem at all. I want to actually explain to you in this session all of the different ways to do things so that you not only have an example configuration, which will look quite nice in the end, I think at least, but you have all the needed knowledge to actually do this yourself and to configure it perfectly to your liking. So in order to move the bar up, we simply search for the status position configuration option. And as you can already see, the status position option here takes the top and the bottom option. So yeah, simply enough, we can move it to the top or to the bottom. And as you can already see, there are a lot of other options here, which starts with status minus. So if you want to take a look at what kind of options are available to configure your status bar, searching for status minus is kind of a good idea, and you might already find what you're looking for. Nevertheless, status position, let's get back to that. So we can actually change the position by simply setting the option in a global way so that it is actually valid for all sessions here. And we simply tell it that we want status position to be top. Now, if we save that file, you can see nothing actually happened. And the reason for that, we already discovered in the last session. tmux is not hot loading your configuration. So the problem here is simply that we need to do this manually. We could either bind that to a key, or we could actually just issue something in the tmux command line. So this is actually the tmux command line, not my NeoVim command line, which are now brought up pressing the prefix key, so Control A plus the colon key. And I can now type there source and just reference our basic tmux configuration file here. I press enter, and as you can see, now the bar moved to the top. Yeah, nevertheless, first of all, now my video image here is in the way of the bar, which is kind of not very productive with you showing all the different configurations and styling there. And as I've said, I don't really like that. So I will move it back down to the bottom. I only wanted to show you how you can actually set that, because I was quite sure that this question comes up first, and it's actually more or less the most easiest way to style tmux in a different way. So I will leave that in the configuration, which I of course will link down below in the GitHub repository that we are creating here. So move status bar to the top, and I will change it back to top here, but I will simply comment it out so that we can actually leave it there. And let's maybe mark this section of the file here and call that theming or something like that, or styling. Yeah, let's call it styling, so that we simply have a kind of a divider which shows us where the visual part of our configuration actually starts. Okay, so now what can we actually change? We will need to do this in a couple of different steps. First of all, talking about what's actually in there in this status bar, how we can actually change its contents maybe, how we can change its colors then, and then make it looking really nice using Nerdfonts and stuff and Unicode characters and so on. So it will be an incremental process where you learn how to actually create your own tmux styling. Let's start then by taking a look at maybe the basic color sets for this bar here, because even though it now already contains the session name, the Windows list here, the host name, and the time and date of recording this video, we simply first of all want to adapt that green to our color scheme. And even though I just realized it looks kind of nice in this green with my NeoVim setup, I still don't like it to be this present, this glowing, this heavy colored. So I usually tend to change that. But how can we change that? We can change that, of course, by setting the right option. And in our case, this option would be status style. And if we take a look at status style here, it says sets the status style. For how to specify style, see the styles section. So we need to, of course, take a look at the styles section, and we will need what's in the styles section later on for nearly everything that we will do from now. So that's why I'm beginning there. So let's go to the styles section. And the styles section is kind of quite amount of down here in the documentation in the man page. So it's styles, and styles, we can ignore this text for now. What's important to us, it allows us to define the displaying style of tmux. So we can define a foreground color using the FG property. We can define a background color using the background color BG property there. And we can define a color either by, for example, names here, or by hexadecimal value, which we will actually use in turn to actually display everything in an RGB terminal, in an RGB ready terminal. Most modern terminals are RGB ready by now. You might need to set some options within tmux, which will be covered in the next video actually, what you need to do in case you don't have true color support in tmux or italics are missing and so on. Nevertheless, that is something else that we can actually set here. We can actually set, in addition to foreground and background and maybe even underscore color, we can set something like bright or bold. We can underscore something, make it even blink if we want to get crazy, or can reverse the color, can actually hide things or make it italic and stuff like that. And that actually is a quite long list here, providing us with a lot of different formatting options where we will mostly only use the foreground, the background, and maybe italics or bold if I'm getting fancy there, styling stuff, maybe. But most of it we will need the FG and the background color. And we will need something else that I will get back to later on. That is actually the way that it allows us to actually here define something inline. I may need to move that a little down. So we can actually define and use styles inline by using this hash square bracket syntax, which allows us to actually define styling configuration within other strings. You will see how this works later on. Okay, so let's get back to our configuration. We wanted to set the basic colors here of this bar. So now we could do that by doing set option -G. Of course, we want it global and we want status style. And now we simply set that to the corresponding style string. For example, we could set the background maybe to, I don't know, FF00FF, and the foreground we could say we want maybe 00FF00. And now if I actually save that and I source that file, you can see that it looks horrible. And you could have already seen that color preview here in my NeoVim, which has a color preview plugin for hex values. Nevertheless, that looks horrible. However, we changed the color, and I set this actually specifically to something horrible to demonstrate that I'm not very good at choosing colors. I'm not that bad at choosing colors, but the reason why I showed that to you, first of all, is that we can set these colors and that we need some sort of predefined color scheme here to work with to style this bar actually, because otherwise I'm getting crazy because I can't invent colors which are fitting. So I usually just copy over specific colors. And the most easiest way to define something like a color palette is actually using variables. And we can use variables in tmux files by simply setting something with an equal sign. So I could do something like, I want the foreground color actually to be 00FF00, and I want the background color to be FF00FF as before. And now I have set those two variables here, and now I can actually use them here by referencing them using this bracketed notation, where I simply now say, okay, I want this one to be BG. And yeah, and I think I have not removed that one. So I want to actually remove this here and reference this one with FG. And now I have actually referenced those variable colors here. And if I now resource the file, you can see it's still the same. To prove to you that this actually works, I will simply change this one to FG and this one to BG. And now it should be exactly inverse. Okay, so we now have a basic understanding of how to set variables and use them within styles. So let me quickly transfer over a nice color scheme, which we can actually use. And I have actually prepared that and paste that in here now, which is a somewhat modified Gruvbox material color scheme. So Gruvbox material color scheme mostly. And essentially what I did is I just copied out the color scheme that I'm using within my terminal here and that I'm using on a day-to-day basis within my shell. That everything else here is based on my NeoVim configuration as well as my terminal configuration and so on. I just copied out those colors here. And if I now save that and now go into the command mode of tmux, not of NeoVim, and I source that file, you can already see that it looks a little bit nicer now. But as I have inverted background and foreground, it's looking a little bit strange and a little bit highlighted there. So let's fix that up. And now you can see it's already looking a little bit more decent because I'm using proper colors. Actually, I'm not using very much color there, but we will change that in a second. So now we have a color scheme, which is already quite nice. So we could use that now to, for example, make the background colorful or the foreground colorful. But before we get back to using all of that colors, which we of course want to do more than just having it neater like that now, I want to actually take a look at how we can configure the contents of what we are seeing here. So we might want to change the contents of this left part here, the session name. We want to change maybe the contents of the active and inactive windows. We want to maybe change the right part here, the host name, the time, and so on. And that is something that we want to actually take a look at quickly to make this a little bit less cluttered, because I usually do not want to have all of that stuff in my tmux bar. I prefer a very small and less cluttered tmux bar with only the most important things there. And the most important things here would be to have the session name on the left and the host name without its domain on the right. And I don't need time or date or anything else. So let's quickly go ahead and take a look at how we can actually remove that. So when we are taking a look at the documentation here, we can actually see that when we search for status left, for example, and going up here, we are seeing already that there are a couple of different things which, for example, are specifically here status left. And status left is display string, by default the session name, which is obviously true. We are seeing the session name here to the left of the status line. The string will be passed to strf time. That might be how this time here on the right is displayed, because I guess status right is passed through strf time as well. Also see the formats and styles section. We also know about the styles section, and we took a look at the format section the last time, but we will in a second again. For details on how to names and titles can be set, see names and titles, and so on and so on. Okay, so there are a couple of examples here. We will not take a further look at that, but we might take a look at this one. So it seems to be that the default is something like square brackets with a hash sign and an S and a space after it, and it looks a little bit weird. So what is this actually? This is actually a format string. So let's quickly jump into the formats section. So the format section actually explains that we can have a specific amount of those format strings here, that if we put them, let me scroll up a little bit, sorry for being too fast here. Where is it? That if we put them in a, here, in a hash sign, with square braces, with curly braces, we can actually print out the dynamic value of that format string there. So if I would, for example, put something like buffer sample in a hash sign with curly braces, it will give me a sample of the start buffer, whatever that might be. And you can see there are a lot of things there. And you might have seen that it told us the default was a hash sign S. So if we scroll down a little in the region of session, you will see that there is something like session name, and it has actually a short identifier. So some of those format strings have short names. Mostly those are the ones that are used by default somewhere or used a lot within the tmux configuration, so that they have a short name. You can either address them directly by their short name, which they did here. So they actually have square brackets, then the session name, and then square bracket closed again, and then a space. And that is actually how they are defining this left part. So you can use the long one or the short one. It's actually perfectly up to you. So that would mean, actually, if we understood that correctly, that we can change the contents here, for example, remove the square brackets by simply setting the option here, globally, of course, again, and we set status left, and we simply set that to hash S. So if we now set this to hash S, it might actually print that, and then not the space, but it directly here to the side, the window pane there. So let's see if that actually works. So let's resource that, and it works. It looks a little bit horrible because there is now no space in between that anymore, but it looks kind of okayish. So now we have the square brackets removed, and we have our window list. So this seems to actually work out. Maybe we want to introduce that space there as it was before, and now it looks a little bit better. We cannot really visually divide that anymore in a good way, but we could change that if we would, for example, be able to move that part of the window list, maybe not to the left here, but align it somewhere here in this empty space, maybe more to the middle. And actually, that is a thing that we want to change next, because I actually discovered, even though I used a long time a theme which had the window list on the left aligned, that I tend to look into the middle of the screen when watching for windows, which is kind of weird. But I realized that it is a lot easier for me to look at the middle of the terminal in order to actually identify which windows are there and which are currently active. So I changed that to be actually aligned in the middle of the window. And the option that we are actually looking for here is session justify. So if I search, I could have, not session, of course, status justify. Sorry, justify. And I need to search upwards. There we are. And status justify actually sets the position of the window list. And that is the window list here. And we can set it left and right. I think those are self-explanatory. We can set it center and absolute center. And by the way, this is a kind of a strange way to write center. I usually thought that in English, the center string is written C-E-N-T-E-R and not C-E-N-T-R-E. I'm quite irritated by that, and I usually write that wrong, and then I get a tmux error and everything is broken. So maybe you can tell me in the comments if this is somewhere a common way to write it, if it's a misspelled thing that they just left in there because they once put it in there, or I'm not sure. I haven't looked that up in a dictionary, so maybe I should have done that before, but I'm just thinking about that right now. Okay, so you can set it center or absolute center. So let's find out what the differences actually are. So if we set the option set option, come on, -G, status justify, and we set that to center. Let's save that and source that. You can see that it actually placed the window list here in the free space that it had between the left part of the tmux status bar and the right part. And even though the right part is a lot bigger and longer than the left part, it is placed in the free space between, which is kind of what I wanted, but yeah, there is this absolute center. And by the way, I have no idea why my highlighting of this configuration file is that broken. I'm sorry for that. I don't know why NeoWim makes it that crazy, but we just ignore it now. Okay, so absolute center. So we are saving that one and now resourcing the file. And now you can see that it's actually placing it in the absolute center of the full shell. So it's now centered in the shell, in the middle of the shell. So I think just select what you want there, what you prefer. I think it depends kind of on what kind of imbalance you have between the left and the right side of your configuration, your tmux status bar there maybe. I usually tend to actually leave it just in the center. But now you can see we don't need this space anymore. So I think we can just remove it. And now we have this still readable quite nicely. So now let's clean up maybe the right part a little bit. So we have the status left here. So maybe what we could do is we could move this justification of this one a little bit up here just to make it a little bit more easy to understand, and then have this better grouped. And then we have a set option here, which actually gives us the possibility to define the contents of the right part here. And as I've already said, I don't need the time and date here. I only want the host name because I'm often jumping around between different SSH sessions with different servers and different systems. And I have my tmux configuration on a lot of them, if that's possible at least. And then I actually want to be able to read which current server I'm on there in a specific shell. So that's why I like it to have the host name printed somewhere in my tmux status. But I do not need the domain at the end. It just wastes space, as well as I don't need time and date. So let's see, how could we print the host name? Let's maybe get back to the formats here then. We need to go down there. There we are. And now let's search for maybe host. And let's go down a little, and there we can already see there are two possibilities. There is host, which is the host name of the local host, nice, which would be a hash sign capital H. It seems it is quite a commonly used property here because it has this short version here. And we have host short, which actually is a lowercase h. So we could either use the long one or the short one. I prefer the short one in this case. So let's maybe just put a lowercase host in here and nothing else. I don't need anything else there. I just want the host name. So let's source that. And now it's already looking a lot cleaner here. So we have our session name on the left, we have our window list in the middle of the screen, and then we have on the right our host name. Okay, so let's get maybe back to coloring things a little bit more. So now that we have kind of defined what kind of content we want there, which is quite neat and a little bit more readable now and a lot better looking because it's not that kind of wasting space and being clunky there, we want to introduce some more color again. So maybe what we could do is we could first of all color the background of those parts of the status bar here before making that then more or less neatly surrounded and changing the foreground color. And the way we would do that is by introducing these inline styles that we learned about at the beginning of our session here. So if we go back to styles, you might remember that we actually have the capability to inline styles by using the hash sign as well as square brackets. So let's go back here and let's inline a style here by simply defining for this part, for only this status left, we want a different style. So we could actually do something like we do a hash sign followed by the square brackets, and we put in the square brackets, for example, another background color. And we could, for example, reference there the light gray color that we defined before. So now when we do that, and I now save that and source that, you can see that this part of the status bar actually got another background color, which is already quite nice. So maybe we want to give it another foreground color as well. So we could do something like, I want the foreground color of that thing, for example, to be yellow. So let's source that, and that's already something that looks a little bit nicer. So maybe we can do the same thing here with our host on the right. So we can simply set that we want this inline style, we want the background color to be light gray, and we want the foreground color, in this case, maybe to be magenta or maybe cyan. Let's do cyan. I think I like cyan here. And I think actually that's what I have in my tmux configuration. So I'm kind of recreating this thing here together with you from scratch. So yeah. But nevertheless, yeah, it's cyan. It looks kind of, I kind of see that it looks like that usually. So, okay. So now we have this, which is a cyan foreground color and a nice light gray background color that already starts to look a lot nicer and a lot better and a lot more styled. Nevertheless, it still looks kind of weird there. So, or what means weird? It doesn't look really nice. So maybe let's take a look at how we can use Unicode characters or Nerdfonts to be precise, to make this look even better before we then use all of the techniques that we are learning during this doing this to actually style this active and inactive windows as well to adapt to the rest of the scheme, so to speak. Okay, so if you do not know what Nerdfonts are, let me quickly tell you. So if we go to nerdfonts.com, which is, by the way, the page to learn about Nerdfonts and to actually get and download Nerdfonts nowadays. Nerdfonts actually started out as so-called Powerline fonts. There was this thing called Powerline, which was used in Vim as well as then in the shell and so on, which had kind of specific characters to differentiate between different sections and so on that actually did not exist as real glyphs and characters in normal fonts. So they decided to simply use empty Unicode code spaces to put a specific new glyphs there that could then be used with a normal font, and then added those glyphs to existing fonts. And Nerdfonts actually is the extension of that's going far beyond that. So we have all of that different stuff now within the font. So we have, I don't know, like 15,000 or 20,000 icons in there. That's actually how NeoVim is displaying file type icons, or like a lot of terminal tools are by now displaying file type icons and stuff. And there is this Nerdfont creation here where you can actually, where is the download button, where you can actually download all different kinds of fonts which are already prepared. This is the basic font, for example, something like Source Code Pro. So we have, for example, Source Code Pro. We have maybe something like, how is it called? Coda? No, Fira Code, I think, is the one. Yeah, exactly. So all of those different coding fonts that are out there and a lot more are actually prepared, and all of those glyphs are added. So if you do not have a Nerdfont installed, then just install one of those fonts and define this one to be used in your usual terminal emulator, and you will have all the glory that we are now using here. Nevertheless, we don't even need the full feature set of this Nerdfonts with all its icons and stuff like that, even though that is neat and nice to have with NeoVim. We only need this little area here at the top. We only need those 7 Powerline simple icons, or even the Powerline extra symbols, maybe. And if we scroll down a little, we see here that there are actually Powerline extra symbols. So let's click on that, which gives moves us to the repository of the Powerline extra symbols. And these are actually what you might have seen already, which is Powerline. So that is what it was originally used for. And we want those round thingies here as well as those triangles. Actually, more I do not even want to use, but those are quite nice to separate our different tmux areas. So if I scroll down here a little, I can see that there are those Unicode glyphs here, which have a specific code point, a Unicode code point, like for example, for our half round closed here, we have E0B4, and for the half round open, we have E0B6. Okay, nice. And for the triangles, we have E0B0 and E0B2 and so on. So we need actually we need these characters. We need the characters at these code points. And the most and easiest way to do and use those is by definitely defining a variable for them again, because then we can reuse them more easily than just having everywhere this strange character. And by the way, initially and always before, I tended to just paste the Unicode character in there, but I always had problems with that. Certain editors would not edit that properly. Certain Git systems or version control systems would not handle that properly. If I moved the file, which was of course then UTF-8 encoded, to maybe a different operating system, it might have done something strange. And I never worked out how to do that in a flexible manner. But then sometime I did, because then sometime I came up with that. Let's see, we want a half round open maybe. So half round open, the character that I was talking about. We could of course now just paste in this specific Unicode character. Nevertheless, as I've said, that would make problems. So what I am actually using is the syntax here, which allows us with a hash sign and then round parenthesis there to execute a shell command within the tmux conf and actually inject the return into this variable here. And this actually allows us to use a printf command within our terminal to actually print a specific Unicode code point without actually putting the specific character there. And that never has made any problems for me since I'm using that, and works great. So that's what we were doing there. So I now print the Unicode character for half round open, E0B6. Yeah, so let's do that. Let's put there E0B6. And now I have a half round open character, which I can actually use and reference somewhere. Let's actually check that this works, because what I want to do is I want to actually make this look a lot nicer by starting this with this round open character here. So let me quickly put this in front of here. So I just do $sign and then the curly braces, and I just tell it that I want half round open in front of our configuration here, which includes the session name. So I save that. I now resource the file, and you can see, well, there is my half round character. It's not really set correctly. It's not looking correctly because the coloring is still off and we haven't defined that yet, but the character is okay-ish. So obviously this here works. So instead of now typing out all of the definitions, I have prepared them, kind of as I have prepared the colors before, because I didn't want to bore you with transferring all of those definitions. But we now have the half round open, the half round close, the triangle open, and the triangle close. So essentially we have this character here, this character here, this character here, and this character here. And we do not need anything else. If you want to use, for example, this kind of a hexagon shape here, be my guest and just use it with the corresponding code point. If you want to use any of the set within the Nerdfont, the icons or anything else in your bar, just copy in the corresponding code point there and just use it like that. It works really great. Okay, so now that we have those, let's maybe go ahead and style this one correctly. Before fixing up the colors, let's maybe take a look at how we would like it to end. And I thought maybe we could create a style here which starts with a round thingy there and then has a triangle on the other side pointing into the middle, and then do the reverse thing on the other side, having the thing point into the middle here and have a round character at the end. So maybe let's do that. And I think this will get a little bit crowded within the string, and we will not be able to easily read that anymore. So I want to show you a way of actually splitting up those definition strings that we are using, those formatting strings, into multiple lines, because you can simply escape a new line within a tmux command and configuration file. So what I can do is I can put a backslash there, and directly behind the backslash I press enter, which will actually escape the new line, which means in terms of reading it by the tmux configuration, it is behaving as if this new line doesn't exist. So it will directly read the next line as it was being here where this escape character is. What this means, on the other hand, is that we can't now kind of indent this, because this will not work. Then we will have a lot of spaces in our string, but it will still make things a lot more readable. So let's maybe differentiate the different sections that we are doing here within our left area. So we will first of all have this opening thing there. Then, and I'm doing the same thing here again and splitting up this line. Then we will have this area here, which will actually display us the session name. And then after this session name, we will have another area there, which where we want to actually go ahead and have this maybe triangle close thingy here. And then actually we want to end our string. So this will allow us to more easily see and edit what's in our status left here. So if I now save that and source that, you can see it still works quite nicely. It is sourced. It looks wrongly formatted because we haven't fixed up colors yet, but you can use this to actually write multi-line theming or format strings. Okay, so let's fix up the colors. What do we need here? Why is this looking wrong? It's looking wrong because we are actually using a filled out character to be part of the background, at least visually. We want this highlighted character here, we want this to be actually the background color. So yeah, let's quickly do that. Let's just define that. Let's define that the foreground color should actually the same thing as we are using for background, so a light gray. But another thing that we want is we wanted to have a background color, which would actually be this cutout here. And we wanted to have a background color, which is actually the default color of our bar. So what we ever defined here within our status style should be the background color of this character printed there. So we can simply put there a default. And if we put default somewhere, it will actually use the default style configuration that we defined before. That actually makes it quite easy, if we do it like that, to redefine something like that in the future. If we would tend to say, okay, now we want to make a light theme of that or something like that, then we just need to kind of redefine more or less background and foreground and maybe a couple of colors, shift them around a little bit there, and then we are already happy with that. So that's why we are using default here. So if I now save and actually source that, you can already see the left part is looking nicely, but the right part is still wrong. Okay, so let's reconfigure this, this triangle here. By the way, why is this actually yellow and not the foreground color that this round thingy had? The reason is quite easy, because the style configuration always is done from the point of its definition. So if we define that here to be yellow, it will simply move on to the end of the string or until it is changed. And that's why the triangle here is yellow as well. But what we need is, we need of course the foreground to be a light gray again. And we want the background, there we are, we want the background to be default. Okay, and if I now source this, I get an error here because I did something wrong. What did I do wrong? I have a curly brace put here and not there, obviously. So let's save that, let's resource it. And this already looks kind of nice. However, I think that there should be more space between the end triangle here and the end of this thing here. So I will simply put a space before here, now moving on to the next line, sourcing that again. And this already looks a little bit nicer in my opinion, at least. If you want to change anything, be my guest, change things. Now we can actually more or less do the same thing in inverse on this side. So I think we will just kind of copy this here so that we can more or less adapt it here. Let's copy that below there. Let's maybe just kind of remove that quickly. Go ahead here, change this to be the host, which was # and lowercase h. And now we need, of course, to move the round thingy to the end and the triangle to the start. So what we want here is now we want a triangle open, of course. So triangle open. And at the end, we want a half round closed. And if we save it now and source it again, you can already see this is looking nice, but now the spacing is wrong because here we have the spacing at the end. However, we need it in front of the host name because it is exactly visually the inverse of the other side. So let's save that here. Let's resource that one here. And as you can see now, it's already looking quite nice. Nevertheless, I destroyed the color in the process here because I overwrote that. That was cyan, I think. So let's quickly redefine that. And what did I do now? No idea. Let's save that. Let's resource that. And now it's looking nice again. We have the session name on the left and we have the host name on the right. Okay, so this is beginning to look a little bit more nicely. And as you can see, this is quite a nice way to format it. Because if you would think of it like we have all of that in the same line, and then even though you cannot even read that anymore or edit that anymore, and it's getting really hard and introduces errors and so on and so on. So doing it this way, actually by splitting up, is kind of a neat way to define that. Okay, so I told you that we of course want to configure this as well, but before we do that, I want to kind of finish the configuration of the left and the right part, because there is one thing that I want to change with regards to the visual configuration of that thing. And that is if I, for example, would press the prefix key, so Control A and the $, and rename my session therefore to something like please like and subscribe, which is kind of a long title there, and press enter, you would see that it only prints please lol, which of course isn't great. I want to actually see even a longer session name there. Usually when I'm not recording a video, I have a much bigger shell here available at my disposal, so I can display a lot more there in terms of contents. I would like to have not the same limitation on the right side. It doesn't have that hard of a limitation, but nevertheless, we want to configure that. And that is actually where status left length, I think, comes into play. So let's see. Yes, status left length. So set the maximum length of the left component of the status line. The default is 10. And there is, by the way, status right length as well. And as you can see, 10 is not that much. I understand that because it should not interfere with the window list and so on. But usually our terminals are that big that it's not a problem. And if we are in the middle of the screen, actually, with the window list, it's not a problem at all usually. So I usually set the left and the right length to 100 or even higher. So let's quickly do that. And then we have a proper displayment of that. So set option -G, status left length 100. Let's quickly, what did I do there? I have no idea. Let's quickly copy that. Let's go here. Let's say we want, come on, right. I just can't type today. Okay, so now we have status right there and status left, and the highlighting is completely broken and I have no idea, but let me quickly resource this. And no, I didn't want to enter that. I want to resource this. And now the session name is fully displayed and everything is as it should be. So let's quickly change the session name again to maybe something like YouTube. Okay, so now we have a proper session name there, we have a proper window list there, we have a proper host name there. Nevertheless, the window list is still not styled, so let's take a look at how to style this window list. There are actually a couple of options that we can set to style the window list, and in contrast to the overall status style, it does not begin. Those options do not begin with status minus; they begin with window minus status. So we search for window minus status, and there we already see are a couple of options. So there seems to be something like window status format. That already sounds encouraging. So set the format in which the window is displayed in the status line window list. See the format and style section. Yeah, okay, we know about those already. Then there is something like window status current style. Okay, what's that? Set status line style for the currently active window. And there is window status current format, which is like window status format. So the equivalent to this one that we took a look at first. So there seems to be something that we need to differentiate between the current style, and by the way, there is Windows status style as well, and Windows status format. So one of those is the overall style configuration, as we did with the status bar, actually. We had this status style here as well. And that's kind of the same thing, but only for those window displayment things, because they such an integral part of tmux. So they get their own specific styling component there and styling options. Nevertheless, what I tend to do is I tend to just put the format in, which kind of defines what is actually printed there. And then I just put the styling inline. So that is what I usually do, because it makes things a lot more readable in my opinion. And it makes it easier to define, because I usually have changing styles in here anyways. So let's maybe go ahead and define that. Maybe first we could define that for the inactive ones. So that would make things a little bit nicer maybe, or we could just train on how to do that there. So we would need to do set option -G window status format, wasn't it? So that would be the format of the inactive Windows displayment here. So this one, this thing here, this 2-. That is what we want to actually configure differently. However, how is this actually created? We have no idea where this 2 comes from. It's obviously some sort of format string, but we could figure it out by using the man page. And then we have the name of the running application there, which we could figure out by the man page as well. But we could take a look at how it's currently defined. So let's quickly do that. So what I can actually issue here is show options, which, as we learned in the last session, is actually the read equivalent of set option. By the way, take a look at that. It's a plural. It's options. And it's show and not get. But yeah, you know. So if you have show options and we want the global option and we ask for Windows status format, we actually get a quite sophisticated string here, which is all of those formatting string stuff here that we have in this format section. This is actually a conditional format string here, which you can read about in this formats part of the man page as well. I don't usually use that. I don't need that, at least not for the configuration that we are creating here. So what we are interested in is the hash capital I, which seems to be the number of the window, and the hash W, which capital W, which seems to be the window name. Okay, nice. So what we want actually is we want actually this to be hash I colon hash W. And now we should actually have kind of mimicked what we what we had there. So let me show you that again. We mimicked what we had there, but without this minus sign, because that's actually one of those window flags that is currently inactive. And we do not print that anymore. So if we resource our file here, actually, you can see that the minus sign is gone. So our status format actually seems to actually, take hold. So what we want to maybe do is we want to maybe configure a color in there, maybe the colon. We could configure the colon in a color. Yeah, that would be kind of nice. So in order to make this a little bit more readable in the end, let's split it up again first in the 3 different parts that we have here, because I would assume that we will kind of make and change some stylings there as well. So let's maybe color this colon here in a way which would be the foreground color, could be, for example, magenta. Why not? Let's make this magenta. And let's make the background color. Do we need to set the background color? I don't think we need to set the background color for now. We just want to set the foreground color. So let me resource this. And now you can see that we set it to magenta. However, as we learned before, it's always styling from this part of the string to the end of the string. We need to reset our styling, of course, for the next part to only color the colon. So let's do that quickly by setting the style here. Foreground color, let's set that back to the default. There we go. And if I save that now and source that, you can see that only the colon is colored. So let's maybe quickly set the configuration for the active window as well. So we might simply copy this here and put that here, and now do Windows status current format, and there we could maybe just change the color of the dot for now and make it red here. So let's source that, and now you can see that we have a red dot, red colon here for the active one and a magenta one for the second one. So if I change to the second window, this one will be red and this one will be magenta. So of course that is not really visible there at all. So we might want to somehow change the indication of the active window a little bit more. So what we can do, for example, is change the background color to the same color that we have here, this light gray there, to make it visually more standing out which one is active. So setting for the active one, we could just go ahead and define that we want the background color to be light gray. So if we save that now and source it again, you can already see that this looks a little bit nicer here and a little bit more visually divided and better looking so that you can actually see it. Nevertheless, it still is a little bit harsh. So maybe we want to add this opening and closing round characters there. And this will, believe me, will make a big difference in the optics and the visual recognition of those things. So what we could do here is now we could introduce another line here where we actually use again our half round open, we called that, I think, yes. And then at the end, of course, we need the same thing, but we need close. So let's source that, and we can already see that looks a lot better visually. Nevertheless, of course, the coloring is kind of broken again. And what we can do here now is we can simply set this color again, as we already did again and again. We need to set this foreground color here to the light gray, don't we? So we set light gray here. The background color should be the default. We don't need to change that, or maybe we should change that specifically just to make sure that we are using the default color at the ends and the starts of the window here, just to make that sure. And we need to, of course, remove that curly brace and put that there, because otherwise it will not work. So now let's source that again, and then we will see, oh, why is this number gone? And the number is gone because we did not define the foreground color here specifically. That is, of course, a problem, because we set it here to light gray, then we set the background here to light gray as well, but we did not set the back of the foreground color back to its default. So what you can actually do to prevent something like that is you could always set the non-used color package there to default to prevent something like that, or you can actually go ahead and fix that when it comes up. And there it seems I have done something wrong. Yes, I have placed the curly brace already again at the wrong position there. And so now you can see this part is already nice looking. The end part is not. So we need to, of course, fix that up here as well by simply putting in there the foreground color of light gray, followed by the background color of default, of course. And if we now source this, this is already looking really nice. And it's looking a lot more visually pleasing and a lot better to actually see which window is active, in my opinion, than it was before without those round edges. I have no idea why this is the case, but I think it is. Now if I change again to another window, did you notice something? If I'm changing back and forth between the different windows here, the bar and the contents seem to move, and they do not only seem to move, they are moving. And I had this configuration for a couple of days, and it made me crazy because I couldn't figure out why the heck this is happening. I always thought that my mind was playing tricks on me and this is not actually moving, but it is moving. And the reason is quite simple. We now have 2 characters more in the active window here. So actually this one has the starting character here and the ending character here. The inactive one, however, does not have that. So we need to kind of adjust for that by adding a character in front and after this one to make them have the same size. Because otherwise, each time we are switching that, spaces are moving around. So we need to put a space here in front of our inactive status format. And we need to actually put a space here. Come on. Here. What the hell is going on here? Here in the end of the status format. And we could even maybe make that more visible by actually putting those in a separate line, maybe. I think I would like that better, yes. Okay, so now we have a space in front and at the end of this inactive window format, which now when we save that and source that, makes things a little bit more stable. Yeah, it makes the spacing bigger. We will take a look at that in a second. But if I now move between those windows, it's beautiful. This moving around and shaking around is gone completely, and it's looking very nice. However, now we have this strange space in between there. And the reason for that is that by default, the separator of this Windows list actually is separated by space. We don't need that space anymore because we introduced the spacing for the window part here itself. So we can easily remove that. So by taking a look at the configuration here, we will see that there is a Windows status separator, which I never seem to write right. Okay, this time I have spelled it right. It sets the separator drawn between windows in the status line. The default is a single space character. Okay, we do not want that. We do not need that anymore. We have spacing defined within our format. So let's just set the set option -G, of course, window status separator, and we simply set that to the empty string. We don't need that anymore. And now watch this too big a space here go away actually. And now we have a stable, nicely spaced window list. And even if I create more windows here, it will always be nicely and fixed here and look good and show us actually which window is active quite fast and visually appealing. And I like that very, very much. Okay, so that is more or less the basic styling that I am using within my tmux configuration that we have now recreated here from scratch. And I hope that you have learned and are now capable to actually create something like that on your own. You can play around with that. You can change the colors, the styling, the characters, the position of elements and stuff like that. There are, of course, a lot more and complicated configurations out there where you are using, for example, replacements with execution of commands to actually show something like the output of the Git branch or something like that within your tmux status bar. That is something that I usually do not need and do not use. Everything like that I actually have within my my shell here. So this is actually showing me the free memory that I currently got, and it's a little less here than usually because it's currently doing transcoding in video and stuff like that. Furthermore, I have parts there if I am, for example, in a Git repository. So if I am going to this tmux from scratch Git repo that I have here, you can see that there is one modified file at the moment. That would be the one that we have been editing at. I'm in the main branch, and so on and so on. So that's actually my shell status line. That's actually a power line. I'm not using Starship. I always thought maybe I could convert to that, but I'm happy with power lines. So if you are interested in something like that, take a look at Starship or Powerline 10K. If you would be interested in having me make a video and show you how you could actually configure something like the Powerline or the Starship integration here for the prompt, tell me that in the comments, please. Nevertheless, what I wanted to say in the end is that I have all of that information in my shell prompt and therefore do not need it in the tmux bar. I usually do not want to have something like that in the tmux bar because I don't want to clutter it any further when I am usually in something like NeoVim, because I already have a lot of different informations here and I don't want to clutter it. But if you want to do that, take a look at awesome-tmux, which is actually a really great list of awesome tmux things that you can actually configure and install. There are a couple of different themes, for example. You do not need to do this by yourself. You could use a predefined theme, as I have done for a lot of times. So, for example, this tmux Gruvbox theme. If you think that you already know that because you have watched some of my older videos, you are right. That's actually, or that was more or less in a slightly modified way, my tmux theme. I used that before I decided to roll my own because I wanted it to look different. There are a lot of different other themes. There are a lot of different things like, for example, here gitmux, show git status in tmux statusbar. And you can take a look at that if you want that, and there is an explanation on how to integrate that. Nevertheless, we will take a look at a little bit of this in the next session, where we will now, as I'm coming to an end with my current session here, telling you how to style the tmux bar. The next session actually will be about integrating NeoVim and tmux so that we can seamlessly switch, for example, between NeoVim windows and tmux panes. If we have splits on the one side, we have, for example, a tmux terminal. On the other side, we have a NeoVim window, and then we want to seamlessly split between those the same way that we switch between tmux windows if we have a split in there as well. So it is possible to do that, and we will do that. We will use that. That is one of the plugins or one of the extensions that I use, kind of. And I will explain it to you. We will take a look at at true color and maybe formatting of specifics in tmux, so that I try to give you a most general idea about what you need to do if your tmux session, for example, doesn't display true color themes in NeoVim or other applications, or can't, for example, display italic fonts and stuff like that, because that's a common problem with tmux in certain terminal emulators. I will not be able to cover every situation, but I can give you a quite good idea about what you need to do and how you need to do it to get it working. In my situation here, it works out of the box, because with Ghosty, strangely, it works perfectly fine. Ghosty seems to understand there's something without us even specifying a specific configuration value there. And I will actually tell you about the TPM, the tmux plugin manager, which we will take a quick look at, which you can use to install external plugins, because there are a lot of plugins with tmux. You can do a lot more stuff with tmux than what I am actually doing with tmux. I will give you a short introduction into that so that you can be on your way and experiment with that further. Nevertheless, I think for now we have a really functional and working configuration. And this configuration actually is mostly what I am really using on a day-to-day basis, and I'm working with, and I'm really happy with doing that. So now you should have all the needed base knowledge to actually configure themes. And if you use actually a predefined theme, you should have the base knowledge now to maybe understand what this theme is doing and maybe modify it to your needs. So I hope you had as much fun as I did while creating this video and writing this config while watching it, and you will give this video a like and subscribe and hit the bell next to the subscribe button to be informed once the next one is out. If you have any questions or suggestions or anything, please leave me a comment. It's always nice to have such a vivid community already, which is talking and interacting with me in the comments. I always like to read and answer your comments. That's a great thing. It makes me happy. And I think there are some nice questions out there and some answers after the video that I can give then and explain some things which I've missed in the video, for example. So always check the comments. If you have any questions, if they are not already answered there, please just tell them to me and I will try and get back to you. It's really great that we have already such an active community. And by the way, if you liked the video, just leave me a comment saying me that you liked it because that's helping the YouTube algorithm as well a little bit. So to make it bump it a little bit more up the ladder there. So yeah, as I've said, I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!